Here are the basic supplies we'll need. I have a few coasters. These are hexagon shaped ones. Then I have a bottle of heavy gesso. This is white gesso. And I have a few chalk paints. This is Twilight Passion, Mango Milkshake, Splendid Sapphire, and Opulent Green. Now the first thing I'm going to do is take the gesso. Then I'm going to take a flat brush and just prep the surface of my coaster. You can also use a sponge brush for this if you do not want these lines to come. The reason why we use gesso to prep the surface is because it creates a non-porous, slightly textured surface so that your acrylic paints basically adhere better to it. And gesso can be used with almost all surfaces for prepping. It is a quick drying medium, and another big advantage of gesso is that you can tint it. Now I'll just let this dry and I'll continue doing the rest of my coasters one at a time. This is the first time I'm using the craft treat gesso and I really like the consistency of it. It is perfect, not too watery, not too thick, and also I like how easily it spreads across my surface. I'm not too particular about the lines that my brush is leaving because I'm planning to give it another coat. But if you don't want that, to avoid it, you can use a sponge brush. Then I'll leave this to dry and I'll come back once that happens. I've finished prepping my coasters. I've applied a good thick layer of gesso on both sides to all fro. Now let's get started with the next step. I have my gesso here and I have the craft treat chalk paints in different colors. So I'm going to just keep one. Now one of the big advantages of gesso is that you can tint it with different acrylic paints or different mediums actually, even with inks and all you can do it. And I'm just going to open my chalk paint and I'll just remove a little bit of gesso here. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the blue chalk paint out here. Yeah, I'll just dip a little corner of my brush. You see, I've got a very pale blue color. I'm going to start applying this. What I'm trying to get is kind of an ombre look. The way to get an ombre look is to keep working the paint till you're happy with the end result. But don't overwork it, because if you overwork it, it'll just turn into a single shade. There. Now I'll let this dry. I want a very pale coat. If you want a darker one, if you want to mix two colors, you can always do that. Add two different colors to two puddles of gesso and then paint it from both sides till the colors meet in the middle. I'll do exactly the same thing with the other paints for the other three coasters and then I'll come back. So now let's start with this. We are going to do the base layer. Actually, part of my video went missing unfortunately, so I'll redo this. Anyway, I find this a little too pale for my liking. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to attach the stencil to this first. Whenever you're doing this, just make sure that you attach the stencil firmly and then also cover all the open areas. Because if you get any paint on the open areas, that will just spoil your background. So now I have a little bit of pink here. I just want to make it slightly lighter. So I'm going to put a little more of the desert dust in it. Then I'll take a sponge and just start putting the color. Now whenever you're doing this, just remember to go in a up and down motion and not press too hard, because if you press hard, there is a good chance that the color will slip through under the stencil and that will not give you a nice crisp image. So there's our base layer done. Now I'll quickly hit this with the heat gun so that it dries completely, and then I'll come back and do the second layer. Now that our base layer is dry, let's move on to the second layer. So I'll just line up the second layer. Now Crafty stencils always have this etched line here. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but this is basically the outline which coincides with the base layer. Makes it very easy to line up the layers. So I'll just put strips of masking tape. I'll just pour some red velvet paint directly now. I'm also adding just a little bit of the desert dust because I don't want it to look too different from the bottom layer. Now I'll just take my sponge. And there, a second layer is complete. Now I'll just dry this and then we will do the last layer. Now let's do the final layer. I've already aligned my stencil and I have this red color left over. What I'm going to do is, since this is the third layer, I'm going to darken this a little. So I'm going to use a little bit of dark brown, which is chocolate chip, to this red color. There, I think this is dark enough. So even if you don't have a whole lot of chalk paints, you can always mix colors. To darken a color, I prefer to add a brown instead of black because sometimes I think black changes the color too much, especially with warm colors like red. And there, our rose flower is complete. So this is our first coaster. I simply masked the flower once it was ready and added a few dabs of opulent olive and desert dust to create the swirls to another stencil. And this is the stencil which I use, which is the Rose 3. This is the second coaster. I used the Magnolia stencil. For these last two stencils, I used the Lotus stencil for this. And for this, I use the Tiger Lily stencil. You'll see how easy it is to use layered stencil and create beautiful, realistic looking flowers with them.